Farraday sat above the tiny crescent of Pebble Beach, staring out. The beach was littered with debris, half-crushed cans of Stella, twists of tarry rope, and away on the gleaming mudflats he thought he caught a flicker of movement. For a moment he was tempted to fetch his binoculars, to put a name to the birds, but he knew at once there was no point. Pritchard's final moments didn't bear contemplation. To walk into a tunnel, to hear the faraway rumble of a train, to feel the ground beneath your feet begin to shake, and then to summon the courage to stand there, feet planted between the rails as the light on the cab lurched into view. There'd come a moment, thought Farraday, when your every instinct was to move, to step sideways, to throw yourself flat, to turn and run, but by that time the monster would be on top of you, and it would be far, far too late. Would you feel the impact, the smack of steel against bone? Would you be aware of the wheels slicing through sinew and flesh before your body, your heart, surrendered? There are three great challenges in writing. The first, and I used to think it was the biggest challenge, is getting into print. And it is huge, it's enormous, it's very, very difficult. The second challenge is staying in print. I never anticipated that. I thought once you're on the shelf, once Clacton-on-Sea Library has got a book of mine, they'll just keep coming. That's not true anymore. So if your books aren't selling, and if the bookshops won't stock them, forget it. The hardest book to get published, say People Who Know, is your third book. The third challenge is getting yourself out of what they call the mid-list to the bestseller list. And that's the equal of the first two challenges. That's enormously difficult because somehow, in a market that's contracting, you have to convince your publishers that you've got it in you, not just the writing, not just the books, not just that hook that you try and sink into the reader, but all the publicity, all the interviews, all the correlative activities that go with it. You know, you've got to sound okay, you've got to travel well, you've got to be funny, you've got to be on top of it all, you've got to look all right, all that kind of stuff, which isn't necessarily the business of being a writer, or didn't used to be. For some reason, Portsmouth doesn't travel well in the publishing world. For some reason, maybe because publishing is a very metropolitan business, most of it takes place within the M25, indeed in central London. You mentioned the word Portsmouth, and something strange happens to publishers. You know, this strange dazed smile. It's partly contempt, it's partly pity, it's partly disdain. They take it a giant step back, and then they say, well, so you've been there, have you? I say, well, I live there. And they say, well, you live in Portsmouth? Why? It's the very end of the railway line. And you say, well, that's precisely why I live there. You know, I'm an end of the railway line person. If you grow up in Clacton, mate, Portsmouth is Florence compared to Clacton. And they say, oh yeah, but it's in a rough old place. And you say, yeah, it is a rough old place on occasions, but it's, you know, it's that, within that roughness and that gruffness and that compactness and that turmoil that is a city like Portsmouth, there lies story after story after story. Now, I'd gone to Orion, and I'd published 2 standalone thrillers with them, both tightly focused, both touching upon, in important ways, Portsmouth. And after the second of those 2 thrillers, a book called Permissible Limits, which they were pleased with, but was anchored very much in the mid-list, we had one of those lunches, you know. There's a rule in publishing, the bigger the lunch, the worse the news. And this was a big lunch. And I delivered half of the next book, which wasn't contracted. And I thought this was going to be a routine lunch, routine contractual negotiations. Yeah, we love the book, no problem, 2-book contract, on you go. And it wasn't until we got to the profiteroles that I tabled the notion of the contract. I said, when are you going to publish it? He said, we're not going to publish it. I said, you're not going to publish it? Why not? And they said, well, we think you're going the wrong way. We want to extend you one of those invitations. And it was one of those kind of Al Capone invitations that you don't turn down, you know. And I said, what's the invitation? And the invitation was to write initially 3, which is an unusual contract, 3-book contract. 3 novels, crime thrillers, different genre completely, not standalone big airport books, not big sexy boys books, but crime thrillers. And the mission statement here was that my cops would never leave Portsmouth, you know. So in a way, it was the commission of my dreams. To write that first book was just the biggest adventure. I mean, I had huge anxieties, doubts when I took the Orion invitation to become a crime novelist. I thought this is going to be a claustrophobic little genre box. I won't be able to flex my elbows. There'll be no room to do the things I did in the big, you know, global, international, standalone airport thrillers. This is, you know, just Portsmouth. In fact, it's been the reverse. I've been able, because I'm writing about things I know about, because I'm on home territory, because this is my world, not the police world, but my city, in the sense that I've lived here for 30 years, most of my adult life. I think I understand how it works, or bits of it work. Now, Lynn and I know, or knew then, still know, a handful of reprobates on the drug squad, people we happened to drink with on a Monday in the wine bar, the Wine Vaults in Albert Road. And they were amusing guys, but all we ever did was to get pissed. And so I didn't really know what the insides of their heads looked like. But on that train home, thinking about the challenge, I thought, well, I'm going to devote the next 6 months somehow to trying to suss what it is to be a cop. Just researching, meeting people, making friends with people, building bridges with people, trying to get inside their heads. And it was an absolutely fascinating 6 months. But at the end of it, I had to sort of take a step back from all those trees and try and see the wood for what it was. And inevitably, you know, I got quite close to some specific stories. Well, I had to try and disguise those, launder, as it were, that kind of research, and devote myself to doing what Orion wanted me to do, which was to come up with a strong central character, a cop. He had to be placed in Portsmouth, obviously, and to start putting meat on those sort of fictional bones. And I came up with D.I. Joe Farraday. Farraday is a man who instinctively feels some sympathy for the underdog, and many policemen feel that way. It's not just Farraday. Farraday is a man who, when it comes to, you know, some of the human virtues, like fortitude, for instance, Farraday has it in spades. He's a sticker. He will labour on till he gets to the end of the job. You know, the true glory is seeing the project through. You're dealing with a man in the shape of Joe Farraday, who might be a very good investigator, and he is. He's stubborn, he's resourceful, he's inventive, he's the kind of man who doesn't give up. But emotionally, he's a mess. Emotionally, he's a man who's suffering from arrested development. For why? Because he's devoted the last 20 years to bringing up his son, who's about to betray him by leaving. As a writer, I found it, the more I got inside Joe's head, and I'm still doing it, book 5, I'm still doing it, the more I admire the man. The third book, Angels Passing, was the book that I wrote having shadowed a major 18-month-long murder investigation. And while it's not remotely based on the facts of that investigation, it is based on what I learned about procedure and all the little incidental things that I picked up along the way. And if it's dark, and God, you know, in some respects it's very dark, then that's simply because I'm getting to know more and more about the way this particular world works. DC Paul Winter, you know, if it hadn't been a copper, he maybe would have made it a very good crook. Now that's a cliche, of course it is, but actually it happens to be true. And time after time, policemen I don't know in this city are making contact with me saying, "You've got it right, mate, you've got it right." And the wife likes them, they're a good read. Now, that's music to my ears, because that was the mission statement. I've been amazed at little acts of kindness that the bad guys have shown, and equally at some of the corners the good guys cut. Now that makes me naive, doesn't it? But what it also does is to people the middle ground with example after example in terms of both character and incident of what I call the minor key. If you're looking for headlines, don't read these books. If you're looking for some reflection of what life really is, at the beginning of the 21st century, in a troubled, crowded city, then maybe they are for you.